Hello there, grade nines. We're coming. Okay, hold on a minute. That's a little bit better. Hey guys, yeah, that's more like it. Okay, guys, welcome. Sorry, I'm having a little bit of fun with these backgrounds, as I'm sure you guys are as well. What this will be, guys, is our first recorded lesson. I'm going to post the PowerPoint slides on Classroom, so you're welcome to follow along. But what we're going to be doing here is I'm going to be leading you through the PowerPoint for the first part of the reading. To be clear, this part of the reading, just have it open beside me, leads you through pages 283 to 288 of the Industrial Revolution textbook reading, which is posted under classwork on Google Classroom. Okay, so again, that's page 283 to 288, and feel free to follow along to the PowerPoint. Okay, I'm going to get it started here in 1 second. Let me just share us in. Okay, hopefully we can see that. Let's just get it queued up here. There we go. Okay, so this lesson today, I'll try to keep it as short as I can. It's intended to guide you through the first part of the reading, which is really dealing with the beginnings and the causes of the Industrial Revolution. The portion of this textbook is called The Beginnings of Industrialization. Okay, so the perk of me recording these is that this is really designed for you guys. So you're encouraged to pause it when you need to take notes. You can rewind it with something you're not sure of, and I'll try to keep it as brief as possible so it doesn't drag on for too long, so it's actually usable for you guys. Okay, so we see at the top of the screen, our essential question for this part of the reading, which is part 1, will be what were the causes and effects of the Industrial Revolution? So for today's lesson, we're going to have 3 sub-questions, which we're going to call herding questions, meaning they're going to help us answer that large question. Just so you know, I'm going to tell you right now, each of these 3 questions will be posted as a Google form for today's homework, and that'll count as a minor assessment. I'll get into this again at the end of the lesson. You will have the choice of answering any one of those 3 questions in appeal paragraph format. So you might want to be taking notes with that in mind, but you can take notes on all 3 and you can decide which one do you feel you'll best answer. So the first herding question will be, in what ways did the agricultural revolution lead to the Industrial Revolution, meaning that inventions in agriculture and farming can be identified as one of the key causes of the Industrial Revolution. Number 2, why did the Industrial Revolution begin in England? England, we can see, is highlighted in history as the real country where the Industrial Revolution began. So we want to identify what was so unique about England and why did these factors lead to the Industrial Revolution beginning there. Number 3, if you're very interested in some of the inventions, our third one will be what were some specific early inventions of the Industrial Revolution and how did they change people's lives? So we can see there that this deals with the effects. Questions 1 and 2 are more causes. Question 3 is effects. So we'll just jump right into the first question, which is, in what ways did the agricultural revolution lead to the Industrial Revolution? And again, this really starts on page 283 of the reading. Okay, so to understand the revolution in agriculture that happened, we kind of have to look at what did agriculture look like pre-revolution. And as you can see from this image, if we were to use it as an OPVL, we can see that this would have been during the times before the agricultural revolution. And you can see that we have really outdated habits of farming, outdated technology, and the farms are very crowded and disorganized. Okay, if we look at this second picture, you can see that things were starting to become organized, but you can see the fields all are sprawling in different directions. They're not particularly organized. And with that, the farms would not have been particularly efficient. So a few particular things that you want to focus on, again, this is having to do with the agricultural revolution, which is on page 283, is that this idea of an enclosure. And what an enclosure means, if you highlight the word in the center, close, is that the farms would have been enclosed and someone would have been in charge of a large area of land. So within these enclosures, productivity increased. And because the enclosures developed, people were starting to experiment with new methods because they controlled a large area of land where they really wanted to use the land for as much economic profit as possible. Okay, what started to happen with the enclosures is that you can see in the middle who is the manor, which was like the rich person in the middle that owned all the land, started to buy up, almost like a monopoly, buying up smaller farms around and expanding their land and making it so that they controlled an incredibly large amount of land. And this really had a tremendous impact on small farmers. One, because they either had to choose, would they continue to work for this person who had bought them out, or would they perhaps start to move away from the farms because they no longer owned the land? They would have been bought out, given a large amount of money or a small amount of money, which would have seemed large to them, and they may have started to move to the city. Because what we see with the Industrial Revolution is that a huge factor involved in the Industrial Revolution where people were really moving to cities and away from small areas, such as farms, okay? Some of the new specific methods. What happened on the enclosures? Some of these new methods that were used were more scientific in nature. One that is highlighted in the reading is called the seed drill, invented by a man named Jethro Tull. And all that that really meant was that in previous times, farmers would inefficiently scatter the seeds all over the farm, and it was not very efficient, meaning that it was really hard to predict which of the seeds would lead to productive crops. So Jethro Tull invented a new piece of machinery where he could methodically, you can see all the plants, if you see in the wheat, are planted in rows, and they would dig holes so that the seeds would take root in the soil, and planting became a lot more efficient. And the second one we see is crop rotation. Now, crop rotation had been used for hundreds of years, even more than maybe up to 1,000 years or more. But what it used to mean was you would grow wheat for an entire year on your land, and then the next year, maybe grow something like turnips on your land, or maybe barley, and every year it would switch. The new method of crop rotation meant that as the enclosures grew in size, people could rotate the crops year to year, meaning that in 1 year, wheat would be grown on one part of land, barley on the second, clover on the third, turnips on the fourth, and then in the second year, it would rotate. So wheat would move to where barley was, barley would move to clover, and so on. And what this meant is that farmers would be able to grow a lot more crops a lot more quickly and have a lot more different types of crops. So the land was used efficiently and they had a lot of money to be made. Okay, and then the third one deals with selective breeding. And again, this is scrolling down to page 284. And all this meant is that farmers developed the idea to really breed the animals which were the strongest groups, the strongest animals of the lot. So selective breeding would mean you would only breed males and females. For example, they mention in here, which are sheep. You would breed your largest sheep together so that the size of the sheep would increase over generations of sheep, and you would have a lot more, depending what you're using, if it's dairy with cows or if it's meat with whatever animal, you would be able to get a lot more use out of those animals because the size of the animals would grow further and further. So how did this impact day-to-day life, eventually leading to the Industrial Revolution? First off, simply put, there was more food available for the population, and living conditions improved as a result of these new inventions, okay? And with that led to a massive increase of population. And with this increase of population, there was more laborers as well as more people to buy the products. So the economy just kept growing bigger and bigger, okay? There was an increased demand for food and goods, and maybe not most importantly, but very importantly anyway, farmers lost their lands to enclosures and many moved to cities. You may have heard of the concept of urbanization. And what this really meant was many people would then move to cities, meaning that as the Industrial Revolution developed and cities grew and factories grew, there were many, many people available to work in the factories and to buy the products that were made in the factories. Okay, so we're going to move now on to herding question number 2. What was so special about England? So the specific question is, why did the Industrial Revolution begin in England? We can see this is a picture of London from the 19th century of what we imagined with the Industrial Revolution. It's crowded, there is a lot of pollution, but why did this really start in England? And why was it special in this regard? So if we scroll down, this is really a small portion of the textbook on page 284, okay? So if we see a map of England and the United Kingdom, one thing that will be highlighted is that there were many workers. England had a large population. In order to run factories and to have a productive economy, a lot of workers were needed. They also had a lot of natural resources. They had a lot of water power to help run some of the inventions and help run the factories through water power. There was a lot of natural resources like coal, which was needed to run the factories, and iron, which would be needed to create large buildings and large scale factories, as well as rivers and harbors, which would be used for large scale transportation, meaning if you made something in one area, you could easily transport it to another part of England quickly and efficiently through the rivers and harbors. Okay? It was also a large expanding economy, meaning it was growing and growing. And this is going to come up in a later point, which I'll mention again in a minute. England was a massive empire. You probably have heard of colonization, meaning England took over large areas of the world. And as it took over large areas of the world in countries like the United States of America, before it was the United States of America, Canada, before it was Canada, Australia, New Zealand, India, all over the world, large parts of Africa, it had a massive global economy. They also had a very established banking system. And why the banking system was so important is that new entrepreneurs or business people needed to have access to business loans. And people were encouraged to take loans out from the banking system to invest in new inventions and new factories. Okay, finally, not for this slide, I mean, there were no wars on British soil, meaning all of the wars that England happened to fight at this time, part of this was because they were an island, but also because they were so powerful. None of the wars happened on British soil, meaning it was a very stable society and stable economy. Okay, as I mentioned before, they had a large empire, meaning a large overseas trade network where they could take the natural resources, as we can see here, from areas like the 13 colonies, which eventually became the United States of America, maybe in the Caribbean, maybe in Africa, and they would ship the natural resources back to England to be processed in the factories, and then send those goods made in the factories back to their colonies to be bought by the people living in those colonies. And this was a tremendous advantage. Okay, they also had a lot of laws to protect free market capitalism, meaning people were encouraged through the laws of England to trade freely without a lot of taxation and without a lot of interference from the economy. And a lot of people feel that this encouraged businesses to start and to trade with one another and to grow a large capital economy. Okay, if you were to summarize it in the last point, this last point is really a summary. England had all of the factors of production. They had a tremendous amount of land, both in their empire, but also good land on British soil with things like coal and iron. They had a large labor force with its large population, again, both inside of England itself, but also within their empire overseas, and they had a lot of wealth, meaning they had a lot of money available and the people had a large economy to invest in new ventures and new inventions and new factories. Okay, so moving on, we're going to now do herding question number 3. What were some of the specific inventions of the Industrial Revolution and how did they change people's lives? We're going to do a few different categories. Okay, the first one, now I want to mention when you have to write a peel paragraph for homework, if you decide to choose this third question, I would probably just pick one of these categories to focus on for your peel paragraph. Okay, you don't need all 3. Now, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail of the specific inventions because you can choose whichever ones you want to include in your peel paragraph. This really starts on page 284 and continues all the way until 288 with a number of different inventions. The first category is textile machinery. And what textiles means is fabric, which can be used for clothing or can be used for bed sheets or anything else that fabric would be used for. And textile machinery was really the first to be transformed, meaning some of the first machinery that was developed regarding industrialization started in the textile machinery. So you could say the first real industrial type of machinery was the textile machinery used to create fabric. Okay, it really increased productivity, meaning in a smaller amount of time, you could make much more of your product because of these particular inventions. And these inventions led to the growth of factories across Britain. And you can see in the picture, which is my background, factories developed all throughout London, all throughout cities like Manchester or Liverpool, which you may have heard of. And these factories initially were making textiles, but then what would happen is that other types of companies would use the same methods in textiles to make other products, all different products which would be purchased around England and around the world. So again, I'm not going to go into all of these different ones. We can see here a picture of what's called the spinning jenny, which was a specific type of one. I've highlighted 5 different inventors and their specific inventions. All of these can be found within your textbook, starting on page 283 and continuing to 280, I guess it's 286, okay? Pick a couple of these if you choose to answer this question. Know what these were. I will let you know in advance if you need to know any of these specific ones on a test. Like I always do, I'll give you a list of vocabulary terms that you're responsible for knowing. But for the purpose of this class, if you want to answer this Peel paragraph for homework, your first minor assessment for this unit, pick 1 or 2 which you find the most interesting and the most important. Okay, one other one to highlight, which was not in England, was called cotton gin, and we're going to mention it now because it will come up later. What it really meant was that cotton production could really increase, and England started to use this as well, meaning you could process cotton itself and make it happen much more quickly. And when this production increased and it would go much more quickly, again, the yield of the production, meaning the amount of fabric you can make, increased dramatically. Instead of having to do it by hand, you can now use this machine to do it for you. Okay, the second category, we're going to take a break here and look for a minute. I forgot at a couple of the factory conditions. So something you could talk about, we'll get into this more in chapter 2 next week, was the factory conditions. And a lot of you mentioned this, I saw in your great Padlet post, were some of the factors like women laborers increasing, meaning more jobs for women was one of these results or effects of the Industrial Revolution, as well as child laborers. So a lot of children started to work in these factories, which was not a particularly good thing because they wouldn't be going to school. They would be working hard, long hours in the factories. For women, it had mixed results. They were often paid less than men, which we'll talk about later. However, previously, a lot of women did not have jobs at all. So some view it as sort of one of the first steps toward a lot of these women being able to become self-sustaining, meaning they could sustain themselves by having their own work and not have to rely so much on a man or a husband. Okay, jumping back in. Category number 2 of inventions will be transportation. Okay, in transportation, we have a few different examples. The most famous one we're going to look at in a minute is the steam locomotive, the steam engine, and the invention of the railway. And we'll look at that in just a minute. Okay, so the first key invention, which you may have heard of, is Watt's steam engine. And that's going to come up on page 287 of the reading. What it meant was it was faster and it burned less coal and was cheaper to use. It was a way to create, through steam, a new method of energy, which could be used to power factories, but most importantly in this case, power the transportation itself. So coal would typically be used in a lot of these factories, but the steam engine could be used for trains and for boats to go a lot more quickly, a lot faster, while using less coal, meaning less coal was needed in order to run this. Okay, a few key people you want to point out are Watt and Boulton as well. And who Boulton was he was simply the man who put up the money, the entrepreneur, to pay Watt to produce these engines. And like I said previously in our last questions, having the finances and having the money and having a solid banking system was incredibly important in order to promote new types of inventions and new types of factories. Okay, next came in the United States of America, the steamboat, and the first steamboat was invented, and this idea came back to England. And in England, like I said, they had a lot of rivers and canals. So this was tremendously important in America as well as England. We're really going to focus on England for today, but these impacts were also created in America because what this would mean is you could transport goods as well as people a lot more quickly and a lot more cheaply. So if you produced a product in one city, you could ship it away to be sold in another city. Or if you lived in one small town, you could be picked up in this steamboat and catch cheap transportation to the city in order to work in the factories. And this was a tremendously important invention. Thirdly was roads. Now the roads, of course, existed previously, but this new system developed by McAdams made the roads a lot more easy to travel on. Okay, and I'll let you read about that in a little bit more detail. Let me just look at the page here. We're talking about page 280, where am I looking here? 287 and 288. Okay, and McAdams and the road network meant that new types of rocks could be put down where water would go through. It wouldn't be absorbed so readily into the soil, so the roads could be used a lot more efficiently. And what started to be developed was this idea of a turnpike, which was the initial word for a toll road, which we have, of course, all over Dubai. The toll roads would mean you could use these new highways, which would be built by private people or by the government, and to pay to use the highway, which would be a little bit faster. Even though it was on horse and carriage, it would indeed be faster because of the type of road. They would collect money, and that money again would go back into the economy, but would also be used to create new roads. And a new network of roads developed where you had to pay money to use the road, just like we have in Dubai, which made people be able to travel a lot quicker. And again, the same impact that we saw with the steamboat, it increased transport of goods and people. Now, finally, we see the steam engine. Okay, we see a couple of specific inventors to highlight here, mostly in England, and one particularly fast railway was called the Rocket, which transported very quickly between Liverpool and Manchester, could transport goods and transport people very quickly, but also very cheaply, which was a very important factor. You could transport goods back and forth very cheaply, natural resources to be put into the factories to be produced into goods, and then producing those goods, like for example, textiles, and then sending them back on the railway to be sold for profit. Okay, so what was the impact of railroads in Britain in particular? Railroads are highlighted as something being particularly important. Of course, transporting materials and products was incredibly important, as we mentioned. It also created new jobs. Okay, and the same could be said for the other ones, but in particular for the railroads became so important. Mining was developed in order to get more coal to fuel the railroads, and the railroads themselves needed people to work and to build new railroads and to run the steam engines themselves. Okay, this boosted agriculture and fishing as well. So if we think about the agricultural revolution inventions, now people could ship food and products as well as fish from the coast inland much more quickly before the fish would spoil, because this would have been much more difficult to consume these goods without them going rotten. So this meant a lot more money to be made and a lot more food to be eaten by people, which again would have been a cycle where people then would live longer, have better quality of life, and be able to buy more goods. Okay, it also just made travel a lot more easy. You could travel between the city and the countryside a lot more easily, whereas in previous times, like we spoke about last semester, when we talk about feudalism, people would typically live in a small area of land. Now it became a lot more easy to travel around and see other parts of your country. Okay, so if we get back to our herding questions to review here. First one, again, I want you to read this in more detail in the reading, but in what ways did the agricultural revolution lead to the industrial revolution? Some of the things to think about that we spoke about would be things like crop rotation, things like the enclosure system, and some of the specific inventions like the seed drill and selective breeding, and then focusing, what were the effects on people? It led to more money to be made. It led more people to move to the cities because they didn't no longer worked on their small farms, but it also led to an increase in the quality of life and people's life expectancy. Number two, focus on those three factors of production: land, land, labor, and wealth. Okay, those three factors that you want to focus on, that England had all of them. England had a tremendous network of people, strong banking system, a stable economy, and a stable society due to no wars. And these were all important factors to allow for England to become the center of the Industrial Revolution. Finally, these specific inventions, I won't recap them. But if you decide to answer this Peel paragraph, highlight one of the categories. It could be textile or it could be transportation. Pick an invention or two and say, how did this specifically change people's lives? Okay, so your homework for today, which will be due, I've changed my mind. Instead of it being due today, we'll actually make it due tomorrow morning. So pay attention to the deadline that I post, which will be 7:40 on Thursday morning. I will create a Google form that's going to be posted. I will list all 3 questions. You choose only one of those questions and you write a appeal paragraph. We'll take it a little bit easy on you guys this week, and we'll just make it appeal with 2 E's, meaning you only need really 1 solid piece of evidence. So this shouldn't take you more than 10 minutes or 15 minutes to complete the question. I'm hoping it's something we can all be successful on. Really focus on having solid evidence. We'll get into this here, a solid explanation, and then linking it all together with the therefore. Okay, again, and I'm also this time going to post the rubric. Okay, each one will be worth 4 points. So you're going to mark out of 16, 4 points for point, 4 points for evidence, 4 points for explanation, 4 for link. You get a mark out of 4 for each, and then that'll be converted into a percentage, which will be posted next week. Okay, so the rubric I'll post on today's instructions. Okay, so remember, you will only have to answer one of these questions. I'm going to stop this here, pick whichever one you're most comfortable answering, and get that done by tomorrow morning. Okay, thanks for listening, guys. If you have any questions, remember to post them as a comment on this specific post on Google Classroom. We'll see you soon.